For years, the world believed Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were living a love story too powerful to fail. They were not just a famous couple, they were a modern Hollywood miss, beautiful, intense, admired, and larger than life. Together, they built an image that felt almost untouchable: a growing family, global influence, humanitarian work, red carpets, and a relationship that seemed to mean more than ordinary celebrity romance. To millions, Brangelina was proof that passion, fame, and family could somehow exist in the same extraordinary world. But the danger of a myth is that people only see the glow, never the fracture. And when their marriage finally collapsed, it did not feel like the end of a celebrity relationship. It felt like the fall of something people had believed in for more than a decade. In September 2016, everything changed. A private flight from France to Los Angeles became the turning point that shattered the image forever. By the time the plane landed, something inside their family had already broken beyond repair. Just days later, Angelina Jolie filed for divorce, and suddenly the question was no longer how this iconic couple had built such a remarkable life, but how so much pain could have existed behind a picture that looked so complete from the outside. To the public, it seemed sudden, but relationships like this rarely collapse in one moment. What the world saw as a shocking ending was more likely the final eruption of years of pressure, distance, strain, and invisible damage hidden beneath the surface of a life that had been watched by everyone. Before the silence, before the legal war, and before the flight that changed everything, there was another story. The story of how Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie became the one couple the entire world could not stop watching. Long before the divorce, the court battles, and the years of silence, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were the couple no one could look away from. Their story began in 2004 on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where the chemistry between them felt so natural, so electric, that the world became obsessed almost instantly. At the time, Brad was still married to Jennifer Aniston, and Angelina was already seen as one of Hollywood's most magnetic and unpredictable women. Bold, mysterious, emotionally intense, and impossible to ignore. What began as an on-screen partnership quickly turned into one of the biggest celebrity stories of the decade. Every glance, every photo, every rumor became global news. Some people saw scandal, others saw fate. But no matter what anyone believed, one thing was undeniable: this was not a normal Hollywood romance. Once they stepped into the spotlight together, they were no longer just Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. They became Brangelina. That name alone carried the weight of an era. It represented glamour, controversy, passion, and a kind of star power so overwhelming that it changed celebrity culture itself. But what made Brangelina more powerful than other celebrity couples was that their image did not stay trapped in scandal. It evolved. What first drew the world in was attraction and controversy, but what kept people fascinated was the sense that they were building something bigger than themselves.
What transformed them from a controversial couple into something almost untouchable was the family they created together. Maddox from Cambodia and Zahara from Ethiopia were already part of Angelina's life when Brad entered the picture, but he embraced them fully, later adopted them, and became part of the identity of the family itself. Then came Shiloh in 2006, followed by Pax from Vietnam in 2007, and twins Knox and Vivienne in 2008. Suddenly, Brangelina no longer symbolized only passion or controversy. They symbolized expansion, legacy, and a life that seemed to hold both glamour and meaning at the same time. A family of 8 moving through airports, film sets, private homes, humanitarian missions, and international headlines became one of the defining celebrity images of that era. To the public, they looked extraordinary. Not because they seemed perfect, but because they seemed to be building a life with scale, intention, and purpose. They were not just photographed together, they appeared to be creating something together. That difference mattered. It made their story feel deeper than ordinary tabloid obsession. People were not only watching a romance, they were watching a family take shape. And that is why the ending would later feel so much more painful than a normal Hollywood breakup. When a couple becomes tied to children, belonging, and the idea of home, the collapse feels heavier. It feels like the breaking of an entire world. As the years passed, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie no longer looked like a couple held together by chemistry alone. They looked like a relationship that had survived enough to become permanent. One of the biggest reasons people believed that came during one of the most vulnerable moments of Angelina's life. In 2013, she revealed that she carried a genetic mutation that placed her at high risk for breast cancer. And instead of waiting for tragedy, she made the deeply personal decision to undergo a preventative double mastectomy. The world saw courage, but it also saw Brad standing beside her through one of the most frightening chapters she had ever faced. For many people, that moment changed the way Brangelina was seen. They were no longer just the glamorous couple born out of controversy. They looked like partners who had endured enough pain together to become unbreakable. But that is often the illusion that hides the truth. Surviving a crisis does not always heal what has already been weakening in silence. Behind the image of strength, the pressures inside their marriage were becoming harder to contain. Their careers pulled them in different directions. Long stretches apart created distance that love alone could not always close. The emotional demands of raising 6 children inside one of the most watched households in the world added another layer of strain no public appearance could ever reveal. In 2014, after nearly a decade together, they finally got married at their estate in the south of France. To the public, it felt like the happy ending everyone had been waiting for. Their children helped shape the ceremony, making it feel intimate and symbolic of everything they had built together. On the surface, it looked like a victory. But sometimes a wedding is not the beginning of something stronger. Sometimes it is a final attempt to protect what is already beginning to slip away. Then came By the Sea in 2015, the film they worked on together about a married couple trapped in resentment, silence, and emotional distance. At the time, they insisted it was fiction, but looking back now, the parallel feels impossible to ignore. Nothing had visibly collapsed yet. There was no public explosion, no final scandal, no single moment the world could point to and say, that was the end. There was only the quiet reality of 2 people who had once seemed destined for each other, slowly reaching a place where even marriage itself was no longer enough to hold back what was coming. In September 2016, the quiet damage inside their marriage finally turned into a public rupture the world could not ignore. During a private flight from France to Los Angeles, a confrontation took place that would become the defining breaking point in the end of Brangelina. To the public, the divorce seemed sudden, almost impossible to understand. But for Angelina Jolie, that moment appears to have changed the question entirely. This was no longer only about whether a marriage could be saved. It was about whether her family could continue living inside something she no longer believed was emotionally safe. Just 5 days after the flight, she filed for divorce. And with that single decision, one of Hollywood's most powerful love stories collapsed in the years of legal war, emotional distance, and unanswered questions. What followed was not a clean ending, but a long and painful unraveling. Court filings, custody disputes, sealed documents, and public speculation kept reopening the wound again and again, turning a private family crisis into one of the most prolonged celebrity breakups of the modern era. The longer it lasted, the clearer it became that this was not just a dispute over money or legal terms. It was a fight over memory, trust, and 2 completely different understandings of what had happened inside that family. And while the adults battled through lawyers and headlines, the children were growing up in the shadow of it all. That may have been the saddest part of the story. Time kept moving, childhood turned into adulthood, and the family that once looked so united before the world was now being shaped by silence, fracture, and distance. Even Chateau Miraval, the estate that had once symbolized their happiest chapter, became another battlefield, proving that when a love story truly breaks, even the places that once held joy can become part of the ruin.
While the legal battles dragged on and the world kept waiting for some final dramatic confession, Angelina Jolie chose a different kind of ending. She did not turn the pain into a spectacle. She did not try to explain every wound in public. Instead, she stepped back, focused on her children, and slowly rebuilt a life that no longer depended on the myth the world once called Brangelina. And maybe that is what makes this story so powerful, even now. Because in the end, the fall of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie was never just about one flight, one argument, or one divorce filing. It was about the collapse of an illusion people desperately wanted to believe in. The idea that beauty, passion, family, and fame could somehow protect a relationship from the damage building underneath. For years, the world saw them as a modern fairy tale. But what their ending revealed was something far more human and far more painful. Love can be intense and still not be enough. A family can look extraordinary from the outside and still be carrying private fractures no one else can see. A marriage can survive scandal, illness, children, distance, and public pressure, only to break under the weight of wounds that were never fully healed. That is why this story still lingers. Not because Brangelina was glamorous, but because their ending exposed how fragile even the most admired lives can be. Brad Pitt moved forward trying to rebuild stability and peace. Angelina moved forward with more distance, more privacy, and a life increasingly centered around protection, motherhood, and purpose. They both survived, but not together. And that may be the saddest truth of all. The couple who once seemed to have everything did not lose each other in one explosive moment. They lost each other slowly, painfully, and in ways the world only understood years later. Nearly a decade after the split, the story of Brangelina no longer feels like a glamorous Hollywood tragedy. It feels like a lesson about what fame can hide, what silence can protect, and how sometimes the real ending of a love story is not the divorce itself, but the long, quiet life that comes after it. And maybe that was the truth Angelina Jolie never needed to shout. She lived it.